This video is brought to you by, well, all of you. Thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel and making these videos possible. Al-Muqaddimah is funded only by Patreon, and as you can see, the videos take a long time to research, edit, and produce. It's only because of my patrons that I can put this kind of time into these videos and keep them free from any kind of paywall. So if you want to pledge $1 or more to support the channel, you can head over to my Patreon. The link is in the description. You can also become a member right here on YouTube. There are no benefits attached to it because I don't get the time to work on them. So if you want to support Al-Muqaddimah financially, please go ahead. Otherwise, just like, comment, share, and subscribe. That's also supporting Al-Muqaddimah.
Hi, welcome to Al-Muqaddimah. My name is Syawish. I've been a fan of the Assassin's Creed video game series for as long as it has existed. The first game was set in the Islamic world during the Third Crusade. It had historical characters, you played as an assassin, you could climb anywhere you wanted, the main guy had a hidden blade, there were horses, it had Jerusalem, Damascus, and Acre, and it was an open world game. 11-year-old me had never seen anything like that. Over the 15 years since that game, the series has changed a lot, and we as players have visited many locations like Constantinople, Rome, London, and even Paris. Finally, in 2023, we got to explore the great Abbasid capital of Baghdad at the peak of the golden age of Islam in 861 CE. This was a really interesting time period in Islamic history. So today, 6 months after the game came out, we're going to take a look at Assassin's Creed Mirage to talk about the real history behind it and break down what happens in the game and what happened in real life. So let's get started. Also, spoiler warning for Assassin's Creed Mirage and pretty much every other Assassin's Creed game. Now, before I begin, I'd like to tell you that I have an entire series of videos about the Abbasid Caliphate, which you can watch to learn more in detail about the events and characters that we're going to be talking about in this video. Also, I'd like to thank Ubisoft for giving me a free key to this game. The game starts in 861 CE in Baghdad. This is a very important date because it marks the beginning of the end of the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, despite what clickbaity news articles might have you believe, the city isn't a very historical recreation of Baghdad at the time. Unfortunately, the reason for that is that we don't have many sources from that time period that talk about it in any amount of detail. Most of the sources that we have come from around a century later. The developers have sort of worked with this. It seems that they were more focused on capturing the feel of the city than making it 100% accurate, which I would say they did a pretty good job with. There are buildings like the Dome of the Ass that didn't exist at the time but are in the game. I'd like to remind everyone that it's not profanity if it actually refers to a donkey. The codices in the game are accurate and do point this out. The codices talk about events that happened after the setting of the game as well. However, in 861, Baghdad was not the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. It was a city called Samara, some 150 kilometers to the north of Baghdad. It was a central administrative city, and unlike Baghdad, it didn't have much scholarly work going on and was mostly focused on government infrastructure. This city is not even in the game, and okay, fine, I get it. It didn't serve the story that they were going for with the game, which I'll talk more about in a minute. We do get mentions of it here and there, but nothing in detail. Not even a hint outside the codices that it was the main city of the Caliphate at the time. Now, the reason that Samara and not Baghdad was the capital was that in 833 CE, the Caliphate went to a man named Al-Mutwakil, who was a son of the famous Harun al-Rashid. For his military, he bought a ton of Turkish slaves from Central Asia. These were hardened men who had no loyalties in the Caliphate and were hence only loyal to their master, in this case, the Caliph. Slowly, Al-Mutwakil built an army of Turkish slaves who began clashing with the older Arab and Persian elites in Baghdad. So around 836, Al-Mutwakil founded a new capital north of Baghdad called Samara. This capital was largely run by the Turks, whom the Caliph was reliant upon for almost everything. They were loyal to Al-Mutwakil, but when he died, the Turks rose to power and actually chose the next Caliph, his son Al-Wathiq, and then his other son Al-Mutwakil. I can understand why they went with Baghdad and not Samara. Samara was, as I mentioned before, largely administrative and didn't have buildings such as the House of Wisdom with dozens if not hundreds of scholars working there. Plus, Baghdad was the commercial center of the Islamic world, so you'd meet people from all over the world there, which you do in the game as well. Also, Baghdad had industry and it had class differences where people were living in palaces and in slums, earning money as thieves and court poets and farmers. So it's a much more colorful setting than Samara would be. Still, I wish that Samara was in the game because I'd like to have seen that. Okay, now that we have the setting covered, let's talk about some of the characters in the game. So the game begins in Anbar, a bit north of Baghdad. We meet Basim ibn Ishaq, our protagonist, and his friend Nihal. They hear of the Caliph being in Anbar at his winter palace, so they decide to pay him a visit to steal some treasure that he has. This is where we meet the first historical character in the game, the Caliph Al-Mutwakil. Now, Al-Mutwakil is one of the most influential figures in Islamic history. In real life, at the time of Al-Mutwakil's ascension to the throne, the Abbasid Caliphate was being controlled by the Turkic military. The Caliph was, more or less, being turned into a puppet. Al-Mutwakil fought against that and almost succeeded in doing so. He was a confident and powerful man who didn't bow down before the Turks. He was also cunning and had political savvy. He strategically destroyed the most powerful men in the caliphate in order to consolidate power. His reign represents the struggle between the older Arab and Persian elites of the Abbasid Caliphate and the new Turkic ones. It also represents the tug of war between the executive and military branches of government, a struggle that still exists in the Islamic world. In short, he was certainly a very capable man. However, here he's shown as a man afraid to the core of the order and acting incredibly cowardly and intimidated. It's of course done to show the power of the order, but still he shouldn't be that weak. He was a confident man who stood up against the military. Then Basim gets into a fight with him and Nihal ends up killing him. On the one hand, I like that Al-Mutwakil was killed by Nihal, our protagonist's friend, who later turns out to be a figment of his imagination. So we take part in one of the most important events in Islamic history, the killing of Al-Mutwakil, which sets off the period known as the Anarchy at Samara, when the Abbasid Caliphate was going through some serious turmoil. However, on the other hand, the weight of his death is severely undermined in the game. One reason could be that the game begins with his death, and so it cannot lay the groundwork for it, or explain the events that led to the killing of Al-Mutwakil. In real life, Al-Mutwakil was killed by the Turks to preserve their own power, and his own son, Al-Muntasir, was involved in the killing because Al-Mutwakil had chosen another son as his favorite. The next character we meet at the same time as Al-Mutwakil is that favorite son of Al-Mutwakil, Abu Abdullah. Abu Abdullah was actually later Caliph Al-Mu'taz. That name might sound familiar to the Crusader Kings crowd because he's the Caliph at the 867 starting date. We do later hear that Abu Abdullah wasn't chosen to be Caliph and is instead preparing a revolt, or at least his supporters are. However, we also find out that his mother, Qabiha, made him sign away his claim to the Caliphate. Qabiha did so in exchange for an attack on the Hidden Ones at Alamut. We'll talk about her in a moment. Abu Abdullah in the game is only there to act scared when we ask him where his mother is. He has no other role in the game. In real life, Abu Abdullah did in fact present an opposition to the caliphate of his brother Al-Muntasir, who was chosen as caliph by the Turks instead of Al-Mu'taz, who was Al-Mutwakil's favorite. The Turks chose Al-Muntasir because he had helped the Turks kill Al-Mutwakil. Al-Mu'taz was indeed made to sign away his claim to the caliphate, but he was forced to do so by Al-Muntasir and his Turkic supporters. Al-Mu'taz later became caliph and was killed by the Turkic soldiers in a palace coup. Now, Qabiha, I think, is pretty accurate in the game. Not all that Order of the Ancients stuff, but her personality was exactly the way that I've always imagined her. In real life, her son Al-Mu'taz, after becoming caliph, had serious financial problems. The military wanted to be paid and Al-Mu'taz was held liable by them for that payment. Al-Mu'taz reached out to his mother to ask for money, but Qabiha told him that she had none. Because of this, Al-Mu'taz was killed by the military. Afterwards, Qabiha's storehouses were raided and a huge cache of coins, precious stones, and gems was found there. She had enough money to save her son's life, but chose the money over her son. In the game, she's also quite cold and calculating, so that part is quite accurate. Interestingly, in the game, we also see some harem intrigue when Qabiha's servant tricks us into poisoning the Wald. The Wald was the mother of the Caliph, or the heir, and was hence the most powerful woman in the harem. However, since Al-Mu'taz isn't the Caliph in the game, Qabiha isn't the Wald, and hence doesn't have as much power anymore. But being the head of the Order of the Ancients, she does have some power beyond the harem. Now, perhaps the most important character of the whole anarchy during the Samara period and the rise of the Turks was Wasif Al-Turki. He was a Turkic general. He was also the last person that was on Al-Mutwakil's list. If Al-Mutwakil had killed him, he could have secured power in the Caliphate and overthrown the Turks. But before he could do that, Wasif managed to kill him. During the anarchy, Wasif competed with other Turkic generals for the control of the Caliph. He led his own sub-army and was one of the most powerful figures. He was killed in real life by rioters in 867 CE. In the game, he's just another villain of the week. He's just another general that you kill because he's a threat to an ally. Plus, he dies in 861, the same year as Al-Mutwakil, and there's no indication of his real power. Plus, he doesn't even look Turkic. His only characteristic in the game is that he's evil. That's it. There's no nuance to his character. In real life, he was Turkic. He was a slave who was taken from his homeland. He served various masters before he rose up to become a puppet master of the region's most powerful empire. The historical Wasif Al-Turki is a driven man that you can even admire at times. He's cunning, but he's also resolute. None of that is present in the game. Moving on to Ali ibn Muhammad, the leader of the Zanj revolt. The Zanj revolt was a very important part of the time period that marked the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate. Even though it was ultimately unsuccessful, it was still very influential. When I first saw that Ali ibn Muhammad was in the game, I was really excited because it meant that the Zanj rebellion was in the game as well, even though the Zanj rebellion wouldn't begin for another 8 years. So what happened to it? Well, nothing. It's just in the game. There are some characters who are fighting someone during a rebellion. It's not even made clear what's going on, just that the slaves are revolting. The rebellion has zero consequences on the story. Even the Assassin's Creed wiki page for the Zanj rebellion has like 6 sentences on it. Now, the main story is kinda meh, as I've mentioned, but the side content has some interesting stuff in there. There was real effort and love put into the story there, which I really appreciate. There's interesting and real characters there as well. The scholar Al-Jahiz is in the game and you have to find and return a couple of books to him. The titles of the books are quite interesting as well, so I appreciate him being in the game. Fun fact, Al-Jahiz actually means the googly-eyed, but he doesn't have googly eyes in the game. Does he? I can't tell. Hunayn ibn Ishaq al-Ibadi is in the game as well. He's a translator in the game and is being forced by the Order to translate a book from the first civilization or whatever they're called. You save him in the game, which is quite nice. Hunayn was a Christian in real life and was the head of the House of Wisdom at one point. He's known as the Sheikh of the Translators because he translated a lot of ancient works into Arabic and preserved them for centuries to come. Hence, he was a really nice inclusion to the game. Then we come to Arib al-Mamunia, who was a poetess and was quite prominent throughout the culture of 9th century Baghdad. Some of her poetry is in the game as well. There are some other characters as well who don't play much of a role in the game's story. There's the Banu Musa brothers, who develop tools and weapons for you, kind of like Da Vinci in Assassin's Creed 2, but they don't really do anything else in the game's story, unlike Da Vinci in Assassin's Creed 2. Then there's Ibn Tahir, who's the governor of the land that the assassin fortress sits on. The Banu Tahir in real life were descendants of a Persian general of the Abbasids and served as governors of Baghdad and much of Western Persia for a long time. Okay, now to everyone's favorite part of my videos, my opinion and thoughts on the story. Back in 2010, when I first played Assassin's Creed 2, it absolutely blew my mind. I realized that looking back at it, I'm probably not remembering everything correctly and, rose-tinted glasses and whatever, but it was the first game that actually made me feel like I was partaking in historical events. I've been a fan of Leonardo da Vinci for as long as I can remember, so much so that in my early teens I actually tried to learn Italian to be able to read his manuscripts. Meeting him and working alongside him in Assassin's Creed 2 is still one of the most incredible experiences of my life. But not just that. In the game, you foil the Pazzi conspiracy, you fight Rodrigo Borgia. Similarly, in other AC games, you take part in historical events. It always fascinates me how the developers found room for the assassins and Templars within historical events, how they fit Ezio into the war between the Ottoman princes in Assassin's Creed Revelations, how they fit Connor into the American Revolutionary War in Assassin's Creed 3, and how many historical events from the French Revolution Arno takes part in Assassin's Creed Unity. Even up to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, this was the case, where the plague of Athens spreads through your direct action or inaction. You always felt like you were a part of these great historical events that you had read about your entire life. However, none of that is present in Assassin's Creed Mirage. Previously on this channel, I talked about how much I'd love to see an Assassin's Creed game set in Baghdad during the Golden Age. I talked about my idea of the assassins being an ally to Harun al-Rashid as he destroys the Barmakid, who would be Templars. However, when the setting of Mirage was revealed, I was actually excited about it because admittedly, they chose a much more exciting time period because 861 was the starting point of the anarchy at Samara. There were so many possibilities for a great story there. This was one of the most dramatic time periods in Islamic history. You have a civil war, factionalism, ethnic tensions, a war between the classes, political intrigue, and so much more. But nope, the writers of Assassin's Creed Mirage used all of it as a backdrop for their mediocre, lackluster story about the Hidden Ones and the Order of the Ancients or some stupid crap about the Isu or whatever. Honestly, who the hell cares about all that stuff with Basim being Loki or whatever? It would be much better if they just wrote a good story in the past and used modern-day characters to jump between them. But no, they had to focus their entire writing on Basim being Loki. They just jammed a few historical figures here and there and called it a day. It's almost as if they were checking off characters from a list rather than learning the history and trying to find room for their fictional characters in there. For example, Al-Mutwakil's death was one of the most pivotal moments in Islamic history, but in the game, it has no impact on the story other than at the end where we find out that Qabiha isn't favored in the Harem anymore or something like that. I, again, wasn't paying much attention to that part. The period of the anarchy is also completely set aside. Other than that, Ali ibn Muhammad was shown as a major figure in the game's promotional material, but he wasn't in the game. I mean, he wasn't a major figure in the game. Any other character in the game could have done what he did. He was only part of one investigation where he told us where to go and who to kill. Any other character in the game could have done what he did. In real life, he was the leader of the Zanj rebellion, the greatest slave rebellion in 1400 years of Islamic history, and yet in the game, he and his men are just another faction for us to get missions from. If the story of the game had just focused on the Zanj rebellion, it would have been a much better story. They could have turned it into a clash between slaves and their slavers, with the Hidden Ones fighting for the slaves and the Order fighting for the slavers. Maybe we could have supported one of the Abbasid princes in the civil war. The Turkic generals played such a major role in this time period, but in the game, there was only one Turkic general, Wasif Al-Turki. His son, Salih ibn Wasif, was also a major figure in real life, but he's not in the game. His palace, however, Qasr Saleh, is in the game. The Ubisoft Bordeaux team completely did away with the plot for this game. It had a lot of potential for an incredible and memorable story that, at the same time, taught people about the history of the Islamic world. They jammed all that in the codices for people to read, which, you don't play video games to read walls of text. And then the game had basically no real story in the gameplay, which is an incredible shame because the gameplay is pretty good. I appreciate the small but dense Baghdad because it's fun to just parkour around it. It's fun to travel. it's fun to see. Compared to Valhalla, where parkour was pretty awful, it's actually quite fun here. Also, the developers listened to the gamers and added back eject. How nice was that? No bigger team at Ubisoft would have ever done such a thing, so that was pretty cool of them. In the end, I appreciate the effort and love that the team put into the gameplay, into designing the city, into their historical research, into the music, especially the music. I love the music of this game so much, but I really wish that they had utilized the real life setting a bit more because it would have made for a really good story. 6 months after having played the game and finished it 100%, I cannot remember the names of any of the fictional characters in the game, other than Basim, Nehal, and Roshan. It makes me sad that so much potential was left on the table. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. On the screen right now, you can see the names and tiers of the patrons. You can join them by pledging $1 or more to support the channel. Thank you for watching.